In this world, most people fall into one of two patterns. Some chase domination, trying to shape the world through force, control, or performance. Others accept being dominated, adapting quietly, hoping approval will earn them a place. But there's a different kind of mind, one that rejects both paths. It doesn't want power over others. It doesn't want validation from the crowd. It wants something far deeper: sovereignty, the right to be the only ruler of its own life. And once this mind awakens, it becomes dangerous to every system that tried to control it. One of these very rare minds is what the MBTI system calls the INTJ, the strategist, the architect, the signal bearer, the one who doesn't just see the system before anyone else does, but builds one, a mind that designs toward autonomy, precision, and internal command. And for the INTJ, that strategy runs deeper than awareness itself. It's not just a choice, it's a structure, but sometimes that structure comes with a cost. Isolation, the world calls it withdrawal. But what if it's something else? What if the INTJ mind steps away, not to escape, but to reassert internal law? What if its silence isn't emptiness, but a sign that a new blueprint is being formed? What if isolation isn't retreat, but a sovereign system rerouting signal, recalibrating direction, and reclaiming authorship over its own architecture? Over the next few minutes, I'll begin helping you answer those questions, and maybe even ask better ones. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand things about your INTJ mind that maybe no one's ever said out loud. I'll show you why what looks like distance is actually your deepest form of strategic alignment, maybe even sovereignty. And you'll also get a 1-minute sovereignty test, the 3 psychological traps that make solitude dangerous, and a 30-second ritual to re-enter the world, not from collapse, but from your exile, to reclaim your crown. But before we go there, here's the problem, and it starts with something Jung discovered. Carl Jung is one of the most influential minds in modern psychology, was particularly fascinated by the unseen parts of the mind. To him, the unconscious wasn't just a hidden archive, but a living system that shapes your choices, your patterns, and your path. He once wrote, "The psyche is a self-regulating system, meaning your mind will always try to restore balance, even if that means pulling you into silence, solitude, or sudden change." Jung also said that part of you looks outward for approval. He called it the persona, but another part, it demands inner alignment, something that can't be negotiated. And for many INTJs, that alignment begins the moment the external noise ends. Think of it like this: your mind is a high-performance engine. Introverted intuition wants a clean mental map, a sprawling, intricate blueprint of reality. Extraverted thinking wants a system that actually works, a precise operational plan. Noise, friction, and constant demands tax both. They clog the engine. So the more capable you become, the more costly interruptions feel. The more you produce, the more you need uninterrupted flow. That's the paradox. Just as your mind grows more powerful, your tolerance for chaos doesn't expand, it contracts. Which brings us to the real question beneath it all. What if solitude isn't pulling away from people, but pulling authority back to its rightful owner? You. Sovereignty means full self-governance of your internal resources. Your time, your attention, your cognition, they operate under your laws, not under others' expectations. Isolation, then, isn't rejection. It's the strategic audit you run on your life. You step away not to disappear, but to reclaim the pen that writes your future and rewrite the flawed narratives. Imagine 2 rooms. In the first, you're praised all day, schmoozing, networking, getting nods, but never completing a single deep, meaningful task. In the second, no applause, just 3 hours of clean, uninterrupted focus that moves your life forward in a profound way. Which room actually builds your future? Which room actually feeds your soul? For INTJs, the answer is obvious. That's not withdrawal. That's sovereignty in action. That's your system prioritizing output over performance. If this deep dive resonates so far, don't forget to subscribe. New depth videos like this every single week, designed for the way your mind actually works. Don't miss the next one. If you felt yourself in that 2-room example, then it's time we go even deeper into what sovereignty actually looks like, not just in theory, but in the invisible architecture of your real life. Because sovereignty isn't just a system, it's a signal you follow through love, conflict, silence, and self. In relationships, it's not dominance, it's rhythm. It's the moment you pause before answering a loaded question, not because you fear tension, but because speaking before alignment would fracture the internal law you're meant to obey. You say, "I'm not ready to answer that," and let the space hold. You choose coherence over comfort, even if it makes you harder to love in the short term, but impossible to manipulate in the long run. In friendship, it's knowing which parts of you are sacred. It's stepping back from the performance of being the deep one in every room and realizing you don't owe your truth to every conversation, only to those that protect it. You stop oversharing, you stop compensating, not because you're distant, but because you're conserving voltage. In family, sovereignty is the quiet refusal to reenact a script. You can love them, show up, even soften, but you don't regress. When the old stories rise, guilt, silence, pressure, you don't fight, you don't collapse. You just remain seated in your new architecture. You respond from alignment, not from reflex. And in heartbreak, sovereignty takes its most brutal form. It's not numbness, it's not pride. It's the sacred discipline of not texting them back, even when every part of you is pulling toward the familiar. You delete the message, not because you no longer love them, but because you remember the cost of self-abandonment. You leave, not as reaction, but as rhythm, because this time, the crown stays on. And finally, in work, it's when your schedule floods with urgency, and instead of collapsing into reaction, you protect a block of time no one else understands. Because that block is where your real work lives. It's turning down the fast-moving project that flatters your ego, because your deeper system is building something slower, truer, and far more dangerous. It's saying not now without guilt, because you know urgency doesn't outrank alignment. This is sovereignty, not detachment, but self-command, not rebellion, but internal law, not validation, but voltage. No applause, no explanation, just the system returning to its rightful rhythm. Earlier, we mentioned the persona, Jung's name for the mask you wear to gain approval. Let's bring that back now, because it's part of a deeper system. The persona helps you adapt socially, but over time, it can start to suffocate your authentic self. Then there's the shadow, the parts of you you've disowned, rejected, or repressed. And here's the trap. If you isolate just to avoid hard truths or difficult friction, the shadow doesn't disappear. It starts governing from the background, subtly making decisions on your behalf, causing you to react instead of create. Individuation, Jung's term for becoming whole, means peeling off the mask and reclaiming your essence. Solitude can accelerate that process, but only when it's sacred, not avoidant. The goal isn't a bunker where no one can reach you. It's a monastery with open doors, a place of deep alignment from which you can return more whole than you were before. Now let's zoom in even closer, into the architecture of the INTJ mind itself. Why does your system crave distance? It's not arbitrary, it's structural. Long before MBTI even existed, Carl Jung identified the core psychic functions that shape this type's inner life. And for the INTJ, everything begins with one powerful driver, introverted intuition, supported by extroverted thinking. And as you may know, introverted intuition wants to build a coherent, elegant model that actually makes sense of the world. It hates fragmented context, superficial chatter, and random social noise that fractures the emerging pattern. Extraverted thinking wants efficient, impactful execution. It hates inefficiency, vague expectations, and having its carefully crafted plans derailed. Together, they demand unambiguous clarity and streamlined flow. And when the world offers only distortion, demands, and diffusion, your mind doesn't just exit, it opt-outs to preserve its processing power. Not because people are bad, but because you fundamentally refuse to outsource your operating system. You're protecting your internal logic board. But here's the crucial twist. The healthiest, most productive solitude often includes a carefully curated, high-signal tribe. Not zero people, just the right ones. The ones who elevate, not drain. Think one person who challenges your ideas without attacking your identity. One peer who can say, "You're avoiding this," and you trust them enough to actually listen. A small group where shared understanding flows effortlessly, without constant explanation or social performance. Solitude doesn't require total silence. It requires psychological coherence and an ecosystem that respects your internal process. It requires filtering, not just fleeing. But how does the INTJ mind distinguish between solitude as a strategic signal of sovereignty or just masked avoidance? Let's run a quick self-diagnostic, a 1-minute test for strategic solitude. Or what I call the 1-minute sovereignty test. Set a 60-second mental timer and answer these 3 questions honestly. First, clarity. After solitude, can you state your aim in one razor-sharp sentence? Not a rambling paragraph, just one sentence a stranger could instantly grasp and repeat. Second, capability. Did your time produce a tangible tool, a concrete decision, a functional diagram, a detailed outline, or a precise plan you can use today? Third, compassion. Are you returning less irritated and more precise, patient, and productive with people? Or are you just more drained? Pass at least 2, and your isolation is genuinely sovereign. Fail 2 or more, and it's avoidant. It's time to adjust your approach. And if that stings a little, good. That's not judgment, that's vital data for your internal system. If you pass that test, or even if something in you wants to, that means your system is ready. Ready to move from scattered withdrawal into complete sovereignty. Because true solitude isn't passive. It's self-governance in its purest form. The ability to enter your inner citadel and choose structure over drift. These next 3 laws aren't performance hacks. They're internal codes, etched into the architecture of the INTJ mind that bring your focus, direction, and deeper knowing back online. Law 1. Define the crown. Before you step into solitude, name the throne you're reclaiming, not a list, not a vague goal. One inner directive that defines why you're stepping away in the first place. When introverted intuition has a clear horizon and extroverted thinking has one true objective, the mind stops spinning and starts aligning. Say it aloud. Today, my solitude serves. If you can't fill that blank with something sacred, focused, and real, then you're not entering solitude. You're just evacuating presence. Law 2. Fortify the borders. Sovereignty means containment. Choose a block of time, 90 to 180 minutes, and seal it like a sanctum. No pings, no passive tabs, no subconscious bleed. This isn't about performance, it's about psychic protection. The INTJ mind is both fortress and forge. If the walls are breached, the process fragments. But when the chamber is sealed, what emerges is not just clarity, it's command. Law 3. Open the gate, but don't abandon the crown. Solitude ends not when you feel done, but when the crown is placed, when the inner outcome has landed. Re-entry into the world must be chosen, not slipped into. Otherwise, the world reclaims you before you've reclaimed yourself. Completion isn't about doing more. It's about knowing when to return and who you are when you do. But even when laws are in place, traps still wait beneath. Not loud, not obvious, but quiet psychological glitches that hijack your solitude and turn your sovereignty into subtle self-abandonment. Here are the 3 most common and how to dismantle them. Trap 1. The persona hangover. You give too much of yourself to rooms that can't receive it. You over-adapt, over-perform, over-explain, and then vanish, not by choice, but from depletion. You call it rest, but it's residue. So what's the shift? Shrink the field. Raise the frequency. Fewer spaces, deeper signal. Choose presence over performance. You don't need to explain your depth to shallow waters. You just need to stop offering it. Trap 2. Input spiral with no inner return. You consume without integration. Books, voices, frameworks. You inhale them all, but nothing lands, nothing changes. You remain mentally full, but directionally empty. So instead, create the return. For every intake, build something that reshapes your inner compass. 1 page of reflection, 1 diagram of realignment, 1 symbolic sentence that rewires your path. If it doesn't alter your internal architecture, it wasn't wisdom. It was noise dressed as intelligence. Trap 3. Shadow governance disguised as strategy. You isolate not to build, but to avoid. You withdraw not for focus, but to escape discomfort, dialogue, tension, and you name it strategy so you don't have to name the fear. So how do you restore alignment? Appoint a trusted mirror, not to flatter, but to reflect. Someone who sees through your logic and names the blind spot without invading your sovereignty. Because real self-rule doesn't mean closing every door. It means knowing which voices you permit to enter and why. And when your time alone ends, don't just drift. Don't collapse into chaos or compromise. You crossed into sacred terrain. Now there's one final ritual to close the gate carry the crown, and re-enter the world without losing the structure you just reclaimed. We've explored the laws. We've exposed the traps. Now, as promised, this is the re-entry ritual. The final step, the one that seals the cycle and teaches your system that solitude doesn't end in drift, but in direction. Before you transition, stand. Not out of routine, but out of sovereignty. Let your body register that something meaningful has just occurred. Breathe deep and slow, like you're coding the clarity back into your nervous system. Now speak your one-sentence aim out loud. Not to remember it, but to embody it. Let the words echo through you as signal, not sound. Then ask, what's the next visible, actionable step that moves us forward? Just one. No more. Write it down on a single line. Something small, specific, and immediately executable. Then do it. No hesitation, no spiral, just movement. After that, send one concise message to the person most directly impacted by what you've just realigned. The message might be a sentence. It might be a signal, but it must be clean. No monologues, no justification, just clarity. Then leave, physically change rooms, move your body, transition consciously. This is where it all locks in, because now your system learns that solitude isn't isolation. It's initiation. You weren't escaping people. You were calibrating the signal that lets you enter the world with more clarity, more command, and less distortion. And as you take that first step back in, say it, not out loud, but inside. I return not as reaction, but as rhythm. That's how you exit the echo chamber. That's how you build sovereign momentum. And that's how exile ends, not in silence, but in sovereignty. Not in retreat, but in the quiet return of the crown. If this activated something in you, subscribe now and ring the bell, because we're just beginning to decode the architecture of deep intuitive minds. The next videos will go even deeper into the hidden instincts, the laws of intuitive governance, and the transformation process that rare intuitives rarely complete. INTJ, INFJ, INFP, INTP. 4 rare minds, each walking a path just as silent, just as strange. This channel is mapping your architectures. Different symbols, same signal. Until next time, go build, go deep, and fiercely protect your signal.